My name is Alyssa Grant, and I was 35 when my younger sister walked into the final interview at the company I had built and presented my own work as proof that she deserved a director's job. Kelsey did not know I would be in the room. She also did not know my name appeared on the incorporation papers, the first client contracts, and every operating system behind VerityFlow. 3 years earlier, she had laughed when I said I was building the company from my apartment. She called me unemployed, told our parents I had become lazy, and asked at every family dinner whether I had finally found a real job. Then she submitted a 14-page supplier recovery plan that I had written for her during that same year. The recruiter introduced me as VerityFlow's co-founder and chief operating officer. Kelsey's smile disappeared before I even saw the title page. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. I had worked in supplier risk and operations for 11 years before my employer was acquired. The new owners eliminated my entire department in one morning. I received severance, a polite reference, and a cardboard box filled with things that suddenly no longer belonged on a desk. I applied for several senior roles, but each interview asked me to rebuild the same broken systems I had spent years warning companies about. Supplier records lived in spreadsheets. Approval decisions disappeared inside email chains. Shipping delays were tracked separately from compliance failures. By the time leadership understood one vendor could stop production, the warning signs had already been scattered across 5 departments. I began sketching a system that could connect those risks before they became emergencies. A former client named Marcus Hale believed companies would pay for it. Priya Desai, a software engineer I had worked with on an implementation project, believed she could build the first version. We formed VerityFlow with savings, severance money, and a contract that made ownership and responsibilities clear. Marcus handled sales. Priya built the platform. I designed the risk model, client workflow, recovery process, and every operating standard behind the service. During the first year, I took no salary. We had 2 pilot clients, 1 unfinished product, and no office beyond my dining table. I worked 12-hour days, but my family understood employment only when another person issued a paycheck. Kelsey worked as a procurement manager for a large appliance manufacturer. She had a company car, quarterly bonuses, and a title our parents could repeat easily. At Sunday dinner, she asked whether VerityFlow had made enough money to become a job yet. When I explained that all revenue was being reinvested, she said a project without a paycheck was still unemployment. Dad laughed. Mom told me not to let pride keep me from taking ordinary work. I stopped describing my days because every explanation became evidence that I was avoiding reality. 6 months into that first year, Kelsey called me after midnight. One of her company's electrical component suppliers had missed 3 deliveries, and production could stop within weeks. Her vice president wanted a recovery plan by Monday. I asked what she had drafted. She admitted she had nothing beyond a list of overdue shipments. Then she said the sentence I would remember years later. "You are home all day, Alyssa. This should be easy for you." I should have ended the call. Instead, I heard the fear beneath the insult. Kelsey had never managed a disruption that large, and failure could cost her the promotion our parents already expected her to receive. I told her to send the supplier records, inventory levels, alternate vendor information, and the exact question leadership had asked. I also wrote that any confidential information had to remain inside her company and that I would provide a general framework, not make decisions for her employer. Over 4 nights, I built 14 pages. The plan separated components by production criticality, created an alternate supplier approval path, assigned communication owners, set daily escalation deadlines, prioritized remaining inventory, and mapped a 30-day recovery schedule. I created the charts, the scoring model, and the executive summary. Then I emailed the file to Kelsey with one clear sentence. "This is the framework I created. Replace the company-specific details and explain which parts you personally execute." Kelsey replied with a heart emoji and said I had saved her. I did not know she was about to erase me from every page. By Monday morning, the only trace of my involvement remained inside the email thread she assumed no one else would ever see. Kelsey presented the recovery plan to her executives as if she had designed every section. Her company approved emergency purchases, moved critical components to alternate suppliers, and avoided a complete shutdown. 2 product lines still ran below capacity, but the company remained operating, and Kelsey became the person leadership praised for containing the crisis. At the next family dinner, Dad raised a glass to her promotion. Mom said Kelsey had always known how to turn pressure into opportunity. I waited for my sister to mention the 4 nights I spent building the framework. She thanked her team, her vice president, and even the supplier representative who finally returned her calls. She did not mention me. After dinner, I asked why. Kelsey said I had given advice, but she had executed it. I agreed that implementation was hers. Then I reminded her that the risk categories, charts, escalation schedule, and 30-day structure were mine. She rolled her eyes and said no company promoted someone because her unemployed sister made a spreadsheet. I told her a 14-page operating framework was not a spreadsheet. She said I was jealous because her work had become real while mine was still an idea. I did not expose her to our parents. I returned home, opened my laptop, and kept building VerityFlow. That silence became one of my mistakes. I wanted the company to succeed loudly enough that I would never need to argue about what I had done quietly. Over the next 3 years, VerityFlow grew. Our pilot clients renewed. Marcus brought in manufacturers and distributors that needed earlier warnings when vendors began failing. Priya turned my manual process into a platform connecting compliance records, shipping performance, financial warnings, and escalation decisions. We hired analysts, engineers, implementation specialists, and client managers. By the time we reached 46 employees and 21 corporate clients, the company had recurring software revenue and a profitable consulting division. Marcus became the public-facing chief executive because sales and conferences suited him. I remained chief operating officer and owned a significant share of the company, but I rarely appeared in publicity. My work lived inside the product, client standards, and operating teams. After years of mockery, I stopped giving my family updates. They knew I worked with VerityFlow. They did not know I had co-founded it. Kelsey assumed Marcus owned the company, and I had eventually convinced him to give me a consulting role. Then her employer was acquired. Her procurement department was restructured, and her position disappeared with 2 weeks of notice. She did not tell our parents immediately. An executive recruiter brought her a confidential search for director of client recovery at a growing operations company. The current director had not announced her departure, so candidates learned the company's name only after signing a confidentiality agreement late in the process. Kelsey passed the first interview, a leadership assessment, and a panel discussion. The final stage required a case study showing a major operational crisis she had personally designed and led. She chose the supplier failure. Her submission said she developed a 14-page framework that prevented a multi-million-dollar interruption. She reused my categories, the same 30-day structure, identical escalation language, and several paragraphs copied word for word. She changed the company name and updated the results. That case study helped carry her into the final round at VerityFlow. I had not seen the earlier applications. Human Resources and an independent panel managed the search, and I was scheduled to join only the final interview as the executive responsible for recovery standards. On the morning of the interview, Helen Brooks from Human Resources sent me the finalist packet. I opened the schedule and saw Kelsey Grant. I called Helen immediately, disclosed that Kelsey was my sister, and said I could not score, recommend, or vote on her candidacy. Helen agreed and documented the conflict. She asked whether I had prior professional knowledge relevant to the interview. I said I did not know what Kelsey planned to present. We decided I would enter only for a formal introduction, then leave before questioning began. Kelsey arrived wearing the navy suit Mom had once praised at dinner. She smiled toward Marcus and Helen until I opened the conference room door. Her eyes moved from my face to the glass wall behind me. Printed there were the words Alyssa Grant, co-founder and chief operating officer. She whispered, "You work here?" I answered, "I built it." Then Helen opened the presentation packet, and I saw the title of the supplier recovery plan I had written from my apartment while Kelsey called me unemployed. I recognized the presentation before I read the first page. The title, section order, and 30-day timeline were unchanged. Even the diagram showing how one supplier failure could move from inventory risk to production risk used the same labels I had created. Kelsey watched my face and understood what I had seen. I did not accuse her in front of the panel. I told Helen I needed to provide information relevant to the authorship of the case study and should take no further part in the interview. Then I left. In a separate office, I opened the old email thread from our first year. It contained Kelsey's request for help, the files she sent, my 4 dated drafts, and the final document with my message telling her to distinguish my framework from the parts she personally executed. I sent the material to Helen. I also wrote that Kelsey had successfully implemented the plan at her company, which was legitimate experience. The issue was whether she had represented the design as her own. I did not recommend rejection. The panel continued with Marcus, Helen, and board member Daniel Cho. Helen asked Kelsey how much of the framework she had personally created. Kelsey said she designed the entire recovery system and received only minor comments from colleagues. Marcus asked why she chose the componentress categories. Kelsey repeated the wording from my document but could not explain the earlier model that produced them. Daniel asked which section changed most during implementation. She said none because the framework had been strong from the beginning. Helen then showed her the metadata from my original file. It had been created on my computer 4 nights before her presentation to her former employer. The document history showed every major section, chart, and escalation table being added under my account. Kelsey changed her answer. She said sisters naturally helped each other and that I had polished ideas she already possessed. Helen displayed the email where Kelsey wrote that she had no draft and needed me to build something before Monday. Kelsey then said implementation made the work hers. Marcus agreed that execution was an important achievement. He asked why her application had not said she implemented a framework designed by someone else. Kelsey answered that senior leaders were judged by results, not by who typed each page. Daniel told her authorship was not about typing. The role required directors to distinguish between work they created, work they supervised, and work contributed by others. Clients would rely on that accuracy during crises. Kelsey asked whether I had arranged the questions to embarrass her. Helen explained that I had disclosed the relationship, left before questioning, and would not participate in the decision. The interview rubric already included questions about individual contribution for every finalist. Kelsey completed the interview, but her explanation kept changing. She claimed full authorship, then collaboration, then ownership through implementation. The panel paused the process, verified the materials independently, and checked her employment references. Her former employer confirmed she had led the implementation, coordinated suppliers, and presented updates to executives. No one disputed that work. The problem was that her case study described the design itself as her personal achievement. The panel rejected her application for material misrepresentation and poor judgment in a role built around accurate client reporting. The letter was respectful. It did not contact her former employer about the file or expose her publicly. Another finalist received the position. I learned the decision only after it was final. Helen confirmed I had not participated in the vote, salary discussion, or ranking. I expected Kelsey to call me. Instead, Mom called first. She said Kelsey had come home crying and claimed I invited her into my company only to humiliate her. I told Mom I had not known Kelsey applied until the morning of the interview. The hiring team selected her because the case study was strong. Mom asked whether I could reverse the decision. I said no. Even if I had that authority, using it for my sister would betray 46 employees and every candidate who represented their work honestly. Dad took the phone and said family should matter more than one answer in one interview. I told him Kelsey had used my work to reach the final round, claimed she created it, and changed her explanation only after the original records appeared. He said I should have protected her before the panel saw anything. I answered that I protected the hiring process by leaving the room. I could not protect Kelsey from the work she chose to submit. That evening, she finally called. Her first words were not an apology. She asked why I had let her walk into the building without warning her that I owned it. Kelsey asked why I had let her walk into the building without warning her that I owned it. I told her I had not known she was a finalist until that morning and had disclosed our relationship as soon as I saw her name. She said that was not the point. I had allowed her to believe VerityFlow was a small consulting job while I quietly became the person deciding who belonged there. I reminded her I had spent years explaining what I was building. She had called it unemployment because that version made her feel successful. Kelsey said I could have corrected her. I said I had tried. She had laughed at revenue being reinvested, dismissed the first clients as favors, and told our parents a company without a salary was not real. Eventually, I stopped offering facts to people who used them only to make the same joke more specific. Then she accused me of enjoying the reveal. I told her I had left the room before the interview questions began and had not participated in the decision. The only surprise I had experienced was seeing my work submitted under her name. Kelsey said she had been the person in the factory, speaking to suppliers, moving inventory, and answering executives. I agreed. She had executed the recovery under pressure, and that was legitimate leadership experience. If she had described it honestly, the case study might still have carried her to the final round. She had destroyed her own strongest achievement by claiming the part she did not create. Kelsey said no one would have respected implementation alone. I told her that belief was exactly the problem. She had decided the truth about her contribution was too small, so she expanded it until it belonged to someone else. She ended the call by saying I had always needed to be the smartest person in the family. I did not call back. I sat in my office after everyone left and opened the first incorporation file. My signature was on a document dated during the same month Kelsey told our parents I was wasting my life. I expected the proof to feel satisfying. It did not. The company had become real without their permission, but part of me had still been waiting for the family to recognize that the year they mocked was not empty. Seeing Kelsey at the interview had exposed her dishonesty, but it also exposed how long I had allowed their judgment to remain important. The following Sunday, Mom invited both of us to dinner and said she wanted the misunderstanding resolved. I refused the word misunderstanding. Kelsey had knowingly submitted a document she did not write and claimed full authorship when asked directly. Mom said interviews were stressful, and people described team projects imperfectly all the time. I asked whether she would say the same thing if an applicant used Kelsey's work to get a director position. Mom said sisters were different. I answered that the job affected employees, clients, and other candidates who did not have a sister inside the company. Family could not become a private exception to standards everyone else had to meet. Dad said I was hiding behind policy because I still resented the unemployment jokes. I told him I remembered the jokes, but memory was not what disqualified Kelsey. The panel had never heard them. They had seen the original drafts, the dated email, and her changing explanations. Kelsey arrived halfway through dinner and said I had made sure the evidence looked worse than it was. I asked which part was misleading. The message where she said she had no draft, the 4 nights of document history, or the email telling her to distinguish my framework from her execution. She said I was making ordinary family help sound like theft. I told her help had not been the problem. Erasing the source and claiming full authorship had been. Dad asked whether I could at least arrange another interview after emotions settled. I said no. The company had already hired another candidate through a completed process. Reopening it for my sister would prove every concern the conflict rules were designed to prevent. Kelsey then said the sentence she had been holding back. She said if I had really wanted to support her, I would have stayed silent about the document and let the panel judge her broader record. I answered that silence was what allowed her to take credit the first time. I had mistaken avoiding conflict for protecting our relationship. I would not repeat that mistake inside a company where 46 people depended on honest decisions. She pushed her chair back and said VerityFlow had made me cold. I said VerityFlow had taught me that every system eventually reveals what it rewards. Our family had rewarded confidence even when it rested on someone else's work. I was no longer willing to call that love. The hiring process continued without any public reference to Kelsey. Helen documented the conflict, the authorship concern, and my recusal in the recruitment file. Daniel recommended one additional policy change. Every finalist presenting a case study would now identify which sections they personally created, which decisions belonged to a team, and which results came from execution rather than design. The rule applied to everyone, not because family cases were common, but because exaggerated ownership was common enough to deserve a visible check. I supported the change without writing Kelsey's name into the lesson. VerityFlow did not need a family scandal inside its training materials. It needed a process strong enough to handle the next candidate honestly. My own review was less comfortable. Marcus asked why I had written 14 pages for someone employed by another company without setting clearer terms. I said Kelsey was panicking and I wanted to help. He said help was not the issue. I had supplied a proprietary framework connected to the early design of VerityFlow before we had formal rules about outside consulting, attribution, or confidentiality. No client data had been used, and the framework was general enough not to create a legal problem, but the situation exposed weak boundaries. Priya agreed. During our first year, the company had depended on informal judgment because we were moving too quickly to document every risk. I had criticized Kelsey for blurring ownership while ignoring that I had allowed family pressure to bypass the same discipline I expected at work. We added written approval for any founder providing outside operational work, clear attribution language, and a rule against using company-developed material in personal favors. I did not accept blame for Kelsey's lie, but I accepted that good governance could not begin only after someone else misused trust. The new director, Simone Carter, joined VerityFlow 2 months later. She had led recovery operations at a logistics company and presented a case study where she openly separated her team's analysis from the decisions she personally made. She did not have the most dramatic story. She had the clearest account of responsibility. Watching her work confirmed the panel had chosen correctly. She asked difficult questions, credited analysts by name, and corrected a client when he praised her for a process developed before she arrived. Kelsey would have been technically capable of parts of the role. That made the loss sadder, not less justified. She had treated honesty as a detail beneath results, while the role required honesty precisely when results were under pressure. For months, our parents continued describing the rejection as a family dispute. I stopped arguing with every version. When relatives asked, I gave one sentence. Kelsey was rejected after an independent panel found that she had misrepresented authorship in her final case study. I did not mention the insults, the old promotion, or the fact that the document was mine unless someone directly accused me of arranging the outcome. Most relatives were less interested once the explanation became procedural instead of dramatic. Kelsey remained unemployed longer than she expected. Her former title opened doors, but director interviews asked for examples of systems she had designed. Without my framework, she struggled to separate projects she managed from methods others created. She called me once to ask whether she could continue using the supplier recovery case if she described me as an outside advisor. I told her no. Advisor suggested she had developed the work and received feedback. The truthful version was that I designed the framework and she led implementation inside her company. She said that wording made her sound dependent. I answered that accurate credit did not reduce her contribution. It defined it. She removed the case from her portfolio instead. Several months later, she accepted a procurement manager role at a smaller manufacturer. The salary was lower than her previous job, and the title felt like a step backward. She did not tell our parents for 2 weeks because she feared the comparison she had once imposed on me. When Mom finally announced the job at dinner, Dad said Kelsey was rebuilding and would return to leadership soon. No one called her lazy. No one asked whether a job below her old level counted as real work. I noticed the difference, but did not use it to humiliate her. The lesson I wanted was not that unemployment should now belong to her. It was that no one's difficult year should become evidence of their character or permission for the family to rank them again. Kelsey's new company gave her fewer resources and less visibility, but the role forced her to build work that could not be borrowed. Her first major assignment involved reducing late deliveries from 3 regional suppliers. She created the reporting process herself, tested it with the warehouse team, and documented every contribution. When one analyst designed a useful alert, Kelsey named him in the presentation instead of absorbing the idea into her title. I heard about the project from Mom, who said Kelsey was finally getting back to the kind of work she deserved. I did not correct the wording. What mattered was that Kelsey now had an example she could explain from beginning to end without changing the owner of any part. Nearly a year after the interview, she asked to meet at a cafe. She began without accusing me. She said she had spent months believing the final round was stolen from her because I had appeared in the room. Then she reviewed the application she submitted and realized my presence had only exposed a claim that was already false. She admitted she had chosen the old recovery plan because it remained the strongest project associated with her name. At first, she told herself implementation gave her the right to present it as her own. Later, she knew the interview would ask about design, and she still did not change the language. I asked why. Kelsey said she had built her identity around being the employed sister, while I was the one who had lost direction. When Verity Flow succeeded, she avoided learning how much I owned or what I had created because the truth threatened that identity. She needed the year she mocked to remain empty. Using the framework let her keep pretending the useful work from that period had somehow become hers. Then she gave me the apology I had not expected. She said, "You were not doing nothing. You were building something I did not understand. I called it unemployment because I needed your life to look smaller than mine." She also said I gave her a framework and she successfully used it. That should have been enough to claim. She wanted credit for the part only I had created. I told her the apology mattered because it named the choice without blaming the interview, the panel, or our parents. She asked whether I could ever hire her in the future. I said no, at least not at Verity Flow. The conflict would follow both of us, and forgiveness did not make family employment wise. She looked disappointed but did not call the boundary revenge. She asked whether we could still rebuild as sisters. I said perhaps, but not through work, money, or secret rescue. We would need a relationship where neither person's success required the other to appear smaller. The rebuilding was slow. I did not send her clients, review applications in secret, or become the emergency solution whenever work became difficult. She did not ask me to. That was one of the first signs the apology was changing behavior rather than only language. We met occasionally, kept career details general, and stopped allowing our parents to compare titles as though one daughter's progress measured the other's worth. When Dad praised my company by saying Kelsey should have learned from me, I stopped him. Her misconduct did not give anyone permission to reduce her entire career to failure. When Mom described Kelsey as the practical one, Kelsey corrected her and said Alyssa had been working during the year we called her unemployed. Those interruptions changed the family story more than one dramatic confrontation could. At Verity Flow's 5th anniversary, we created a small display about the company's first year. Priya contributed the original software sketch. Marcus added the first unsigned client proposal. I placed the notebook that had lived on my dining table beside the first operating framework. The display showed unpaid pilot plans, rejected pricing models, product diagrams, and the month we finally paid ourselves salaries. I did not include Kelsey's email or any reference to the interview. The point was not to prove she had taken something. It was to show that beginnings often look like failure to people who recognize work only after success makes it visible. During the event, a new employee asked which page marked the moment Verity Flow became a real company. I told her there was no single page. It became real through hundreds of decisions made before anyone outside the room believed us. My sister once believed unemployment meant I had stopped building a life. In reality, it was the year I built the company she later asked to join. She did not lose the job because I remembered every insult. She lost it because she submitted my work as proof of her own leadership. I had already opened one door for her. The second one required the truth. A year after Kelsey joined the smaller manufacturer, she was asked to lead a supplier review with one condition from her new director. Every recommendation had to show who created the analysis, who approved the decision, and who carried out the work. The rule would have irritated her once. This time, she built the presentation around it. She credited the warehouse analyst who designed the alert, the finance manager who calculated the exposure, and the plant supervisor who changed the receiving schedule. Her own contribution was coordinating the response and deciding which suppliers required immediate action. The project reduced late deliveries over the next quarter, and her director promoted her to senior procurement manager. When she told me, she did not compare the title to mine or ask whether I thought it was enough. She said she finally understood why accurate credit made leadership stronger rather than smaller. I congratulated her on the work, not the promotion alone. That distinction had become important to both of us. Our parents took longer to change. Dad still spoke as if one daughter had won while the other was recovering. At a family dinner, he introduced me to a cousin as the daughter who built a company from nothing and Kelsey as the one getting back on her feet. Kelsey corrected him before I could. She said she had not fallen because Alyssa rose. She had made a bad professional decision, accepted the consequence, and rebuilt through different work. Then I told Dad Verity Flow had not been built from nothing. It had been built from severance savings, Priya's engineering, Marcus's sales work, early clients willing to take a risk, and dozens of employees who joined before success was guaranteed. Dad looked confused because both corrections removed the simple ranking he preferred. Mom changed the subject. Later, Kelsey said that moment would once have embarrassed her. Now the embarrassment belonged to the comparison itself. VerityFlow also entered a new stage. We were preparing to expand into Europe through a partnership rather than opening an office immediately. The board asked whether I wanted to become chief executive, while Marcus focused on partnerships. Years earlier, the offer would have felt like proof that my family had been wrong about me. By then, I knew a title chosen to answer an old insult would be a poor business decision. Marcus remained better suited to the public role. I preferred operations, product standards, and client risk. I declined the title and negotiated expanded authority over global delivery instead. When I told Kelsey, she asked whether I was sure I was not making myself smaller. The question did not feel competitive. It felt like something she had learned to examine in herself. I told her choosing the work that fit me was not shrinking. Chasing the largest title so no one could call me unemployed again would have meant their judgment still controlled me. Kelsey nodded and said she understood more than she wished she did. We began speaking more honestly about the year after my layoff. I told her how frightened I had been, even while defending the company. I had watched savings disappear, wondered whether the pilot clients would renew, and avoided checking retirement accounts because the numbers made the risk feel irresponsible. Kelsey admitted she saw only the parts that made her feel secure. My uncertainty gave her a position in the family she had always wanted. She had mistaken being less afraid than I was for being more capable. I told her I had also used silence as a way to imagine I was above the comparison. I was not. Every time I refused to explain VerityFlow because I expected mockery, part of me was still waiting for a future success large enough to embarrass them. The difference was that I did not use that resentment to take something from her. Understanding my own pride did not reduce her responsibility. It helped me stop building my identity around surviving her judgment. At work, Simone asked me to review a candidate portfolio that included a team project. The candidate had clearly separated her contribution from her manager's design. She described what she implemented, what she improved, and what she inherited. Her honesty made the project sound smaller than Kelsey's old case study, but it also made every answer credible. We hired her. I later told Kelsey about the decision without revealing confidential details. She said the candidate had probably saved herself years of trying to defend an achievement that was never fully hers. I heard no bitterness in the sentence. That was when I began believing our relationship might become something other than a carefully managed truce. 2 years after the interview, Kelsey was invited to speak at a procurement association meeting about recovering after a supplier disruption. She called me before accepting. The old 14-page framework was still part of her professional history, and she did not want to repeat the same mistake by hiding it under new language. I told her the decision was hers, but the account had to be exact. She wrote a new presentation that focused on implementation. One slide explained that an external operations specialist had designed the original recovery framework and that Kelsey led the internal execution, supplier coordination, and executive reporting. She did not use my name because the audience did not need our family story. She also included the later system she had built herself at the smaller manufacturer. One project showed how to implement someone else's method under pressure. The other showed how to create a process, test it, and credit the team. Afterward, she sent me the recording. I watched her answer a question about authorship without becoming defensive. She said leaders often weaken their credibility by claiming every successful idea around them. Accurate credit does not make a leader look less important. It shows the leader understands how work actually happens. That sentence would have sounded impossible from her 2 years earlier. I replied that the presentation was honest and useful. I did not say I was proud because I did not want the relationship to become another approval system where she needed my judgment to validate progress. She later told me she appreciated that. Our mother's behavior changed only after a family conflict that had nothing to do with work. A cousin launched a catering business and went months without paying herself. Mom described her as unemployed at dinner. Before I could speak, Kelsey asked whether the cousin had registered the business, signed clients, and worked daily. Mom said yes, but insisted income made work real. Kelsey reminded her that VerityFlow had taken a year to pay me and that the family had used the word unemployed to dismiss effort they did not understand. Mom tried to say the comparison was different. Kelsey answered that it was different only because everyone knew how my story ended. A beginning did not become legitimate after success. It either involved real work at the time or it did not. Mom apologized to our cousin. Later, she sent me a message saying she finally understood why the old question had been cruel. I had not needed a lecture about responsibility. I had needed room to take a calculated risk without being treated as lazy. Her apology came years late, and after the company's success made belief easy. Still, it named the harm more accurately than anything she had said before. Dad remained proud of Verity Flow, but uncomfortable with the fact that his early judgment was now part of the story. At the company's 6th anniversary event, he asked whether he could attend. I said yes as a guest, not as someone whose approval had made the company possible. He stood beside the display of our first-year materials and stared at the notebook from my dining table. One page contained a monthly budget showing how little money remained after software development. Another held a list of 10 potential clients, 9 of whom had rejected us. Dad asked why I had never shown him how serious the work was. I told him I had explained the work repeatedly. He had decided seriousness required a salary before he listened. He said he thought pressure would protect me from wasting time. I told him pressure had not protected me. It had made failure harder to discuss with the people who claimed to care about me. He apologized without saying the criticism had motivated me. That mattered. The anniversary also brought an unexpected question from a journalist writing about founder stories. She wanted a dramatic account of being mocked by family and later rejecting my sister from a job. I declined. Kelsey's interview was relevant to our hiring controls, but it was not marketing content. Turning her worst decision into a public origin story would have repeated the same error she made with my framework. I would be using someone else's failure to enlarge my own achievement. Marcus agreed. We spoke instead about the problem Verity Flow was built to solve, the first clients, and the decision to keep founder authority separated from hiring outcomes. Kelsey learned about the interview because Mom mentioned it. She asked why I had protected her reputation after everything. I told her I had protected the truth. Her misconduct belonged in the company's confidential record and our family history. It did not belong in an article designed to make me look triumphant. She said that was the first time she understood the difference between accountability and humiliation. By the 7th anniversary of Verity Flow, the company employed more than 100 people across product, client recovery, engineering, and risk analysis. We kept the original notebook in a secure display near the training room, and new managers heard how a company could exist before it could afford salaries. Every case study, project review, and promotion file required clear attribution. We never named Kelsey. The rule remained useful because results are shared, and authority becomes dangerous when one person controls both the work and the story. Kelsey continued at the smaller manufacturer and eventually became director of procurement. She earned the promotion with projects she could explain without borrowing anyone else's design. When the offer arrived, she called our parents first, then me. She said the title felt different because no hidden document sat underneath it. I told her clean achievement did not need a better story than the truth. She laughed and said I still sounded like an operating manual. This time, it was affection rather than contempt. We had coffee every few months, attended family dinners without letting our parents rank us, and kept work boundaries firm. She never applied to Verity Flow again. I never offered. We could care about each other without recreating the conditions that once made support, competition, and authority impossible to separate. One winter evening, Mom brought out old family photographs. In one, Kelsey stood beside me during the year after my layoff. She wore a company badge. I was holding a laptop because I had been answering a client message before dinner. Mom said she remembered thinking the picture showed one daughter settled and the other lost. Kelsey said it showed one daughter with a visible employer and another daughter building one. Mom did not defend herself. She wrote the correction on the back before returning it to the album. Dad later stopped introducing me through the company's valuation or employee count. He said I worked in operations and built systems that helped companies manage supplier risk. The description was less impressive at parties and more accurate. I preferred it. The last conversation Kelsey and I had about the interview happened after she was asked to mentor a young manager. The woman had led a difficult project, but worried executives would overlook her unless she claimed more ownership than she had. Kelsey asked what she should tell her. I said she already knew. Kelsey later told the manager to document her decisions, name the team's contributions, and explain where she added judgment instead of pretending she invented every tool. The manager received a promotion months later. Kelsey said helping someone advance honestly felt better than winning attention through a story she could not defend. The lesson had become part of how she led. Looking back, the year my family called unemployment was one of the hardest periods of my life, but I no longer needed to turn it into a legend where I always knew VerityFlow would succeed. I did not know. Marcus did not know. Priya did not know. We had research, experience, contracts, and enough savings to take a measured risk. We also had fear. The work was real even before the outcome was certain. A paycheck can prove income. It cannot define whether effort, discipline, and responsibility exist. Kelsey once used my work because she believed a result mattered more than the truth behind it. I once hid my work from my family because I believed future success would speak more powerfully than present vulnerability. The difference was that one silence protected my fear while the other erased someone else's contribution. We rebuilt only after naming that difference honestly. My sister did not lose the VerityFlow job because I remembered every cruel dinner question. She lost it because she submitted my framework as proof of her own design and changed her answer when the records appeared. I did not give her the position, and I did not take it away. An independent process did what a fair system should do. Years later, she built a career she no longer needed to borrow from me, and our relationship no longer required either of us to be smaller. It was not a perfect reconciliation, but it was a relationship no longer built on borrowed work, hidden resentment, or family rankings. The company she once called unemployment became the place that taught both of us the same lesson. A door opened by talent can still close when honesty is missing. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Quiet Truth Stories. And if you want to support this channel, you can use the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. Every bit helps us keep giving more stories for you.